History and the Fate franchise go hand in hand like Musashi and the Police. It seems obvious that a series that constantly features characters pulled from history and mythology would do their history homework. However, considering that Fate Samurai Remnant is also a period piece, there's a lot more to unpack with regards to the story, the characters, and their relation to actual history more than we'd usually expect. And what better way to celebrate it than to present some very interesting historical details that you may have missed in Fate Samurai Remnant. So, here are 6 historical details for your nerdy self to indulge in. Spoiler warning. We will be talking about a lot of character backstories and story developments throughout the game. So if you haven't finished the game yet, we advise you to turn back. Maybe watch our review of the game instead? Despite Chiemon looking and sounding like an edgelord, thanks to voice actor Nobuhiko Okamoto, he seems to really get along with his servant Lancer. In turn, she also seems to get along well with him, even seeming to care for him too. You could blame it on the strong grudges of her master that she was summoned into an altered state. In this state, she's not her usual proud, saintly self, but rather a more docile, puppet-like person who listens to whatever her master wills. However, there is another explanation. Lancer empathizes with Chiemon's past. Chiemon was the survivor of an actual historical event called the Shimabara Rebellion. In 1637, a number of peasants were revolting against the overtaxation that the rulers of the Shimabara region, the Matsukata clan, placed on the people. A lot of these distraught and oppressed people found solace in the teachings of Christianity. But the Matsukata clan wasn't just satisfied with taking their money and banned the practice of their religion as well. As a result, a charismatic young man believed to be Heaven's messenger sought to end this suffering and led the now called Shimabara Rebellion. Someone believed to be Heaven's messenger. Sound familiar? Well, it should be, because 1, and also 2, this young man's name is Amakusa Shiro. Yes, this guy from Fate Apocrypha fame. Amakusa led his forces against the shogunate. On a little side note, Minamoto Musashi was said to be part of the shogunate's forces. However, in the end, after a fierce campaign, the rebels were driven back. Amakusa was captured and thusly beheaded. In fact, a total of 37,000 rebels and sympathizers were beheaded. This is where Chiemon's story starts. As his family was part of the rebellion, his mother was taken away, and his father was fatally struck down in front of him. This is what led to Chiemon's intense hatred for the shogunate, as well as his intense desire to see his parents again. If he were to be the last one standing in the waxing moon ritual, he would use his wish to open a door to hell just to meet his parents again. Lancer, or John the Ark in her past life, is a woman of God herself, and sees Chiemon as a sinner in need of salvation. And we see this in the game's story, as she tries to reach out to him multiple times. However, knowing Chiemon's past, we can theorize something else. Maybe, just maybe, she saw herself in Amakusa, and though she wasn't directly responsible, felt that her actions similarly led to someone to suffer so intensely, all for a cause that touted the very same beliefs she died for. Dorothea Coyett and Chenggong were 2 masters who barely interacted with each other over the course of the story. But in one of the endings, they had a very short but very meaningful conversation. To someone who isn't familiar with the history, it may look like your usual emotional last conversation scene, but it definitely alludes to something more.
迷惑ばかりかけてしまった。その上、結局勝てずじまいとは。
Dorothea Coyett is the fictional daughter of real-life Swedish nobleman Frederick Coyett. Frederick Coyett was the first Swede to travel to Japan and China under the employ of the Dutch East India Company. During the events of the game, Japan was still under Sakoku, the period of time when Japan isolated itself from the world. And the Dutch East India Company was one of those special few given permission to trade with Japan. This explains why Dorothea was even able to enter Japan in the first place. On the other hand, much of what we know of Chenggong is already stated in the game. He's a general born in Japan of Chinese and Japanese descent and would do anything to restore the glory of the Ming Dynasty. Now onto the aforementioned last conversation. Coyett tells Zheng that he grew soft on Iori, whose alliance he was going to betray at some point anyway.
途中で情が湧いたかしら。あなたとはまたどこかで戦う気がするの。
I feel like we will battle again somewhere. Coyett continues and says that if Zheng doesn't learn to do what's necessary to win, she will have the upper hand. Coyett is actually referring to the real-life battle for Taiwan that occurred between Zheng and her father, who was then a governor there in 1661. The dialogue seemed to imply that Dorothea and Zheng will meet again during that battle. As for how it goes in universe, who knows? However, the actual historical counterpart sees Zheng fulfilling his promise to Archer by successfully driving the Dutch out of Taiwan. Maybe we can be successful in getting you to like and subscribe as well. Tsuchimikado Yasuhiro was the master of caster and the observer of the waxing moon ritual. Much like Zheng, he sought to restore the former glory of his family, who actually played a big role in Japanese history. The Tsuchimikado family was very influential, especially around the time that the game took place. So much so that the family had the shogunate's recognition that all divination activity required licensing from their family. Yasuhiro's lineage in particular is a family well versed in onmyodo, a form of magic and divination. They were said to have descended from Abe no Seimei. For those who don't know, Abe no Seimei is one of Japan's most famous onmyoji, and is also subject to a lot of other pop culture fiction. He is also closely tied with other popular Fate characters, namely Shuten Doji, as it was he who divined her location, helping Minamoto no Raikou find and slay the Oni. Minamoto no Raikou, of course, being one of the most iconic FGO servants for reasons. This makes it that much more ironic that Tsuchimikado Yasuhiro, a descendant of Abe no Seimei, would fall to Minamoto no Raikou's blade within Fate Samurai Remnant story. And speaking of Minamoto no Raikou, in the latter parts of the story, you finally find yourself clashing with the servant in the imposing armor, Rider. Iori and Saber face off against the servant until they finally break down Rider's heavy armor. She is then revealed to be a younger Minamoto no Raikou, calling herself Ushi Gozen. Where does the name Ushi Gozen come from? The Ushi in Ushi Gozen is written as ox, the second sign of the Chinese zodiac. An actual puppet theater piece during the Edo period tells us the story of a wife of Minamoto no Mitsunaka giving birth to a boy during an ox year, on an ox day, at an ox hour. This child would become Minamoto no Raikou's younger sibling, but he was born with ox horns with an Oni's face, leading to the decision that he had to be killed. The person responsible for killing the child couldn't do it, and instead raised him in secret in the mountains where he would later be known as Ushi Gozen. Now, rather than being a protective bigger brother, Minamoto no Raikou would later be tasked with removing Ushi Gozen instead. The Fate franchise, with their eternal love for taking a lot of creative liberty, made Ushi Gozen and Minamoto no Raikou the same person, and also made him a girl with huge assets. Well, she's younger in this one, so minus the extra assets. Another interesting bit of trivia is that Ushi Onis are usually depicted like this. And what does Ushi Gozen look like when we fight her? Musashi did in fact have an adopted son named Iori. There are many stories as to how Musashi came to adopt Iori, and Fate Samurai Remnant tells its own. However, currently the most accepted theory is that he was the son of Musashi's older brother. In Fate Samurai Remnant, after the death of his master and adoptive father, Iori was understandably heartbroken, but he was also left unsatisfied. Iori was very enthusiastic about his master's teachings, which is evident in that he would hone his sword skills every day. That's why after his teacher's passing, being distraught that his master couldn't teach him anymore, he went to an unlikely mentor, his teacher's rival, Sasaki Kojiro. Now, Fate fans probably recognize this name because he was Assassin in the original Fate Stay Night visual novel. However, this is another point where Fate Samurai Remnant deviates from history. After Musashi and Kojiro's battle, Kojiro was said to have lost, not just the duel, but also his life. In any case, in Fate Samurai Remnant, Kojiro lived through his duel with Musashi long enough to see him pass and be his son's new mentor as well. Kojiro was able to teach Iori well enough that by the time Iori met Musashi again in the form of our favorite Dimension Hopper, who also has assets of her own now, he had a secret weapon against her. Again, this should be familiar to any Fate fan, as Tsubame Gaishi was also Kojiro's noble phantasm in FSN. Fate's Tsubame Gaishi was a reality-bending slash that allowed Kojiro to slash in 3 directions at the same time. We see Iori pull this off flawlessly. But with his knowledge of Niten Ichiryu, a style of swordsmanship developed by Musashi that utilizes dual wielding, Iori is able to modify the technique and double the number of slashes he can unleash, slashing in 6 directions at once. The visuals accompanying it are also a great nod to the original Fate's depiction of Tsubame Gaishi. While this may seem like a fictional name for a fictional move in a game, Tsubame Gaishi is a real move in Kenjutsu. The actual Tsubame Gaishi, however, is a lot less, impossible. Tsubame Gaishi in actual sword fighting is a simple feint where the swordsman pretends to miss a downward swing. As the opponent is lulled believing their opponent missed, the sword is then swung back upwards. It's quite an effective move as it's hard to block a slash coming from below. And while we're on the topic of skills, Iori's sword kata, earth, water, wind, fire, and void are named after the 5 sections in Musashi's book on martial arts philosophy, the Book of 5 Rings. This sets up Iori as learning from 2 of the greatest swordsmen in Japanese history, 3 if you count Saber. We wouldn't be surprised if Iori appears in FGO at some point to be a fairly formidable servant of the Saber class. Speaking of references to the original Fate Stay Night, this is a big one. The original FSN Saber is now an anime icon, known to many as the poster girl for the Fate franchise. Her true name is Artoria Pendragon, who, you guessed it, is King Arthur but with extra assets. It's a running theme in the Fate franchise, really. So who better to be Saber in a Fate set in Edo, Japan, than Japan's very own King Arthur, Yamato Takeru. Sure, we can point out that Fate's Yamato Takeru and Artoria share similar designs, a phenomenon commonly called saber face. However, their similarities don't stop there. A lot of people say that there are some details that both their stories share. We can start with their birth. Arthur wasn't raised in the lavish background fit for royalty, as he was sent to Sir Ector, a mere knight, to be raised. Thus, he never really knew of his destiny to rule until much later. Yamato Takeru was much the same. He was born as one of the twin sons of the emperor. He was never chosen to be heir apparent. Rather, he was sent out of the land to be exiled in the guise of a mission. His father never really approved of him because of how terrifying his strength and ruthlessness were. Also, he killed his brother, so yeah. Obvious similarity is that they both have magical swords. King Arthur has Caliburn and Excalibur. There are people who would say that they're the same sword, but others would say that they're 2 different blades with different origins. Caliburn as the sword he pulls out of the stone, and Excalibur, the one given to him by the Lady of the Lake. In any case, the Arthurian swords share similarities with Yamato Takeru's own 2 swords, the Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi and the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Both are central to the exploits of the 2 heroes, both given by women of mystical origin, and both have 2 distinct names.
Ame no Murakumo no Tsurugi!
Both also met their end in a similar fashion. When Arthur died, he was placed on a boat to float down the Avalon, a mystical land where he will recover and return someday as the once and future king. When Yamato Takeru died, he was buried, but then in place of where his body should be, only clothes remained. He actually turned into a bird, fulfilling one of his wishes of being able to fly and flew towards the sea. Both heroes share a connection to a body of water and the implication that they're not really dead, but have taken on a different form or will come back someday. Fate is a series that's just oozing with historical and mythological tidbits to unpack, and those are just a few of what we unearthed for Fate Samurai Remnant. We're sure that there are more things that we didn't cover in this video. But then, that's where you come in. Are there any interesting facts that you know about the characters, setting, and history of Fate Samurai Remnant that you'd like to share? You know where the comments section is. But that's it from us for now. Like and subscribe if you want more content like this. You can also check out our website for more news, reviews, and all things gaming. Till next time, this is Game8, signing off.